Almost every turn of the century essay, newspaper article, or commentary hinged its argument on the relationship between the sexes and how men and women would use postcards. The likelihood of a disturbingly casual courtship occurring via postcard messages was a prevalent theme in the press. Surely, part of early 20th century anxieties around how people used postcards resulted from lingering 19th century beliefs over proper letter writing, namely that men should write business letters and women should write personal letters. Letting your loved one know that you were thinking of her or him vis-a-vis a public postcard threatened to collapse the boundaries not only of the proper navigation of public and private sentiment, but also the line between masculine and feminine behavior and how each sex should handle the course of courtship. In the previously quoted 1907 New York Times article, the same post office worker who discussed the staggering number of cards that moved through the mail system also spoke about the gendered sentimentalities of postcard messages, stating, quote, "Is a man in love? Then what better can he send than a postcard simply bearing the name of his beloved," end quote. However innocent such postcards might look to us today, it is important to remember that at the time they symbolized a frightening breakdown of the proper rituals of attraction and affection, not to mention concerns over the mass-produced and impersonal sentimentality attached to picking out a card pre-printed with a dear one's name. Other commentators expressed similar concerns, again associated with advances in technology, not the railroad this time, but the telephone. In 1906, an anonymous writer in the Atlantic Monthly exclaimed, quote, "It is not only to the traveler that the postcard has come as an insidious temptation. It has invaded the courts of love as well. If he does not propose by telephone, query, will you have me? Answer, yes, who is it? He sends a postcard bearing 2 hearts pierced by Cupid's arrow, and the deed is done. Blighted by the pernicious postal, how shall we renew to posterity those fragrant traditions which all the world loves best?" End quote. Because postcards literally and figuratively carried the rituals of courtship and affection across distances near and far, a surprising number of postcard images linked the sender to the actual material medium of the card itself. This, too, had historical antecedents. For centuries, letters were figured as symbolic bodies, objects that stood in for the trembling hand or palm of the sender, for instance, and postcards and their imagery extended this conflation between the written word and the sender's body. Postcards, like letters and greeting cards, reached quite efficiently across differences in physical location, offering their users the immediacy of the post coupled with the intimacy of handwritten sentiments. Men were rarely connected with a beating heart throbbing in the sheet of paper or the sentimental teardrop staining the ink at hand, at least in the public discussion, if not in the actual surviving letters and postcards and greeting cards that we find today. Appropriately for the imagined purpose of sentimental relations, if not for the reality then, images of women's bodies on postcards and greeting cards prevailed and often served as a site upon which talk about the post and affection manifested in visual form. Turn-of-the-century postcards often depict images of women's bodies and conflate their bodies with the material existence of the postcard. Walter Wellman, a prolific and prominent early postcard illustrator, drew a series of postcard images that illustrate this phenomenon perfectly. One card from his 1908 Palm in Hand series shows a woman's exaggerated and enlarged palm, her hand conflated with a postcard as a material object that could travel through the mail and reach a mail. The caption reads, "Here's my hand and my heart goes with it." Another image from Wellman's series presents a woman's hand as, in the timeless words of pop singer sensation Beyonce, something which, if you like it, then you gotta put a ring on it. Such forthright behavior on publicly viewable postcards might invoke suspicions of unseemly conduct, and much postcard imagery commented self-reflexively on their status as postcards and proper gender and sexual behavior. In another popular early 20th century series, the postcard is a public document mixed unsentimentally with a scene of intimate love. With a caption that reads, "Take a peek at me, I've got the habit now," the postcard employs double entendres, as both the love habit depicted and the habit of postcarding are engaged. More importantly, the voyeuristic component of the public card and what should be properly private behavior is addressed. The eyes enclosed in a rectangular frame hovering above the frisky duo makes it clear that relationships between the sexes are something to scrutinize, and also remind users that postcard correspondence is not a private affair. This image polices everyone whose hands and eyes might pass over the postcard. Anxiety about navigating these opposing forces, private intimacy versus public courtship, particularly concerning women, is palpable via postcards' visual and textual ambiguities, and double entendres and puns on postcards were an extremely common way of chastising the people they depict, and hence the people who used them. Ambiguity is also evident in a Valentine postcard from the Freeport Historical Society's collection, which inspired the title of my talk today. We see here a fox reading a book that is compared to a lover's face. While the image appears innocent enough, consider for a moment what we are looking at. Just look for a minute and try to guess what this image says. What might first strike us is the image of the fox, again, innocuous enough. But what do foxes typically call to mind? For me, at least, a fox is a traditional symbol of cunning. It is not for nothing that the phrase "sly as a fox" is well known. The next aspect of the image that might strike a viewer is the book that the fox is reading. While the title or caption states "your face is like a book" and not the more common "your face is like an open book," the fact that the book is obviously open suggests the more common phrase. What I'm trying to get at here is the multiple, even contradictory ways that we might read sentimental images that seem wholly uncomplicated at first glance. A fox peering into a book emblazoned with a title clearly meant to represent the face of the recipient of the card suggests that the fox, or maybe the sender of the card, can see straight into the essence of the card recipient's heart. Yet in a prime example of the multiple ways these images speak, consider this. The book title actually reads, "Your face is like a book, fox." In other words, we could argue that our dear fox is just as transparent as the recipient of the card, and that for all his or her cunning, the card's recipient might see through the sender's intention in sending a sentimental postcard too. What these images show us is how societal nervousness over improper, or at the very least, tension-fraught sexual conduct between men and women was a salient theme that appeared often on Progressive-era postcards. These tensions often show up in even deviant and provocative ways. As the new woman came to prominence during the first 2 decades of the 20th century, first signified by the Gibson girl, who we will see shortly, but later, as in this Valentine greeting card depicting a mix between the flapper figure of the 1920s, and this is also from the Freeport Historical Society's collection, and the Fisher and Christie girl types of the previous decade. Athletic, sexually liberated, and educated, the threat that women posed in light of their new sexual agency and dangerous gender blurring became a conspicuous subject on countless cards, postcard, and greeting. In one part of a larger series mailed in 1911, we even see what looks to modernize like a sadomasochistic scene. A woman reverses traditional gender roles and rides a man like a mule, clearly smiling all the while. And I found there's a letter here, I'm not sure the man who sent it, but it's on the wall over there, and that's going some. That phrase is used almost identically in his letter. So I just noticed that, and I think that's something we should look at a little more, maybe later. Another card sent in 1911, from one man to another, depicts a hapless chap as a puppet grasped in the claws of a blonde dominatrix with a whip. From the comical to the seriously worrisome image, postcard images both reflected and policed social change. They also shaped these changes using humor as a way to mediate anxiety. Terror is conquered by laughter. What we find additionally on many of these postcards are images that played very much off stereotypes. Racial and ethnic stereotypes can be found on historic postcards and greeting cards even when they are not immediately obvious. This postcard, posted through the mail in 1909, shows a Scottish, denoted by his vaguely tam-o'-shanter cap there, Yankee lobsterman at work, with the caption, "How'd you like to do this for a living?" directly calling or hailing the recipient into the cultural and social logic behind its question. Though Yankee lobstermen were surely a well-established cadre of the workforce by the early 20th century, the card's imagery problematizes the boundaries of class within racial and ethnic codes. This lobster man's arms and legs are white, yet his face is clearly much darker than the rest of his body. It is, in fact, the same color as the lobster he grips in the crook of his elbow, suggesting that the working classes have animalistic yearnings and that their skin color is a useful point of reference in determining class status. We might even argue that his face is an open book through which we can read his race and his class. The Scotsman's sexual openness openness is suggested not only by the obvious innuendos manifested by the fact that he has a dame sitting on his shoulders, through the color similarities between man and lobster and the way that the lobster reaches towards the woman's bottom,